Right. Well, thanks so much for joining me today. For joining this session. I'm joining you, really. It's good to see you all. Some we've met before. Hi, Rob. Hi, John. Sam, and is it Piotr?
Peter, yeah.
Peter, yeah. Yes.
It's Piotr, but Peter is good.
Okay. Thanks. Have you already introduced yourselves and done around the table, or?
Not really. We said hello, but not introduced ourselves.
Okay. Should we do that? Should we go around and just explain kind of who you are, what your cider brand is, and then we'll go from there. How about that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Let's start with you, Sam, going around my screen.
Great. My name is Sam Fitz. I'm a co-founder and president of ANXO Cider in Washington, D.C. We're mid-sized in liters. I guess we make about 500,000 liters a year. And we every major market in the US. So we have 20 wholesale partners across the country. We also export to Canada and to the UK. We're lucky enough to and we're also the US importer for Oliver's cider, Ross on Wye, and Little Pomona, which is kind of a new development for us. So we're shipping cider. All of our products are no sugar, so totally dry, and they're all apples only. We don't use any fruit other than apples, and we're the largest producer. We uses palm fruit. Most other all producers than us have ventured into other things, which is obviously fine. And we buy all of our apples directly from farmers, but we press, so we don't actually press ourselves, which is makes our lives a little convenient as an urban cidery. But we do buy all of our fruit as whole fruit directly from the growers and not from. So that's my thing. I love dry cider. I'm happy to be here, and I know John and the tradition of cider making in the UK. And thanks for having me.
Brilliant. No, great to have you. Thanks for sharing. Peter, how about you?
Okay, so I'm based in Hampshire in England. So we are a very small cider producer. We do 7,000 litres a year, just underneath the duty break. And we produce really one type of cider with two variants, really. And it's a champagne method cider. So it's a double fermented with a second fermentation in the bottle and then a long lees aging. So the main product we produce has at least 18 months lees aging in the bottle. And we've got a special one that I produce, which comes back from 2014, which has had at least 5 years lees aging in the bottle. If anyone's had the sort of cider collection, I think there's a bottle of that in the collection that Albert's put together. So we sell throughout the UK, don't sell abroad. We work with companies like Waitrose, have worked with Laithwaites. We've got some lovely supporters like Fortnum & Mason, Berry Brothers, Chewton Glen, Athenaeum Hotel, so some quite nice, prestigious resellers. Yeah, we don't grow it. I buy fruits from local growers. And as we were just discussing with Robert, my fruit comes in, it's all hand-picked. It's super clean before we start. And even then we still sort it again anyway, but then we press it on site.
Brilliant. Well, welcome, Peter. Thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
John, how about you?
Oh yeah, relatively short, really. I mean, I've been working with Mike Johnson at the Ross on Wye Cider and Perry Company for like 20 years. We used to make wine in my teens, mostly fruit country wines, and also we had ciders in the village as well. Incidentally, cider in those days was just cider. There wasn't like dry. There wasn't any choice. That's it. If you wanted to adulterate it further down the line, it's entirely up to you. But yeah, I mean, really, I think it's all about truth to materials, to be honest. In that, you know, you need to make sure that you've got nice, clean fruit, excellent, in the right condition for pressing and fermenting. So the right sugar content, everything needs to be overripe.
You're just a little quiet, John. Is your microphone? Yeah, if you're just a little far away from the microphone, maybe.
Now, if I turn up, is that any better?
Yeah, that's good.
Right, I've turned you up as well there.
Okay.
Could you hear me at all?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Oh,
Yeah. Just slightly quiet. That was all.
Well, I'm a quietly spoken man. I mean, I can project, but yeah, to be honest, it is all about truth materials. I like to see the fruit from the tree to the ground, to the press, all the way through the process. Keep it nice and clean. It's just good traditional cider, effectively, is what we're out to make. Yeah, minimum intervention and maximum care and attention. That's it.
Brilliant. And you do you work with Ross, like you said, but you also do your own. That's right as well, isn't it?
Yeah. I've had my own exemption for about 15 years now, and these days I just do like 2,000 litres maximum would be the absolute maximum. Sometimes 400 litres a year just bottled for personal consumption and small releases. But I decided in 2014 just to exert my efforts more with Ross cider than with my own. So, other than research and development, in my own cellar.
Fair enough.
Somerset Foxwell with 10% Dabinet sweet coppin 2019. Cheers.
Oh, cheers to that. Yeah. Thanks for sharing, John. Rob, how about you?
Well, firstly, hello everybody, and yeah, my name's Rob Clough. I make Charnwood cider. You can't see that one. Anyway, I make Charnwood cider in Leicestershire. I've been going for about 10 years now as a cider producer. It was always a sort of a side project that I did alongside working full time. And then a couple of years ago, I wanted to take the cider thing further. So I joined forces with my friend who's a brewer, and we set up a pub together. So we've got a brewery, sap and cider house. So I've got a fully in the world of alcohol now, you could say, which has been a big learning curve, great experience. So I use local fruits that I go around local orchards and collect the fruit. So I've been going back to these orchards for many years now, but I've also planted my own orchard, which is now getting to the point where it's starting to produce a decent amount of fruit. So because I've got quite a few varieties, incidentally, all my cuttings came from Broom Farm, Ross and Y, because we used to go to their cider festivals back in the early days, which was a lot of fun and a lot of headaches, next morning headaches. So yeah, I've now got a lot of cider varieties which I can experiment with, which has been good fun in the last couple of years, and it's also very exciting to start using your own fruit from your own trees which you've grafted and watched grow over the years. So that's kind of where I am at the moment. I mostly, in the time I've been doing it, I've mostly packaged into bag in box and supplied to the pub trade. And now last couple of years I've been dabbling in bottling. So there we go. And I do believe there's one of my bottles is in the pack, the cider bottle pack, which for CraftCon. So mine's the little bottle. There's a lot of big 750ml bottles there, and mine's the little one. So there you go.
Which one is it, Rob? What
So this one is it's a blend of 3 apples. It's mostly Ellis bitter. I think the second biggest part is Harry Masters Jersey, and then the smallest amount is Brown's apple. So we've got a couple of good tannin-rich ciders, and then a nice sharp in it as well. So it's a blend of convenience, really, because you have to use what you've got. So and I didn't have enough for a single variety of the Ellis bitter or the Harry Masters Jersey. So and I had a bit of brown spare. So it just kind of a blend of convenience, as I like to describe it. But it's actually turned out all right. I think it's okay.
Good. Good. Well, if anyone's watching and they've got the CraftCon box, they'll have your bottle and Peter's as well, the Chalkwood. Sorry, I've just had a total mind blank. Sorry.
Chalkdown.
Chalkdown. Yeah, I was combining your two names there. Sorry.
Good name.
Yeah, I've had both before, and they're fantastic, so I can attest to that. So we're here to talk about dry cider, and you've all thanks for giving your little intros, and there's quite a variety between you here of methods and fruit and and marketing. So I think this session is really for us to kind of have a good discussion and explore kind of why dry cider is so great, why it's seeing the resurgence that people that some makers I don't think have realized, because a lot of people still consider the market being quite, it is probably sweet dominated, but there is space for dry cider. So it would be nice to kind of talk about your experiences, why you make it dry, and what the feedback is you get, and how other makers could get into doing good dry cider. So who wants to start, really? I don't want to keep going around and picking on you all, so chip in.
Can I start? Do you mind?
Go for it. Yeah.
So yeah, for me, my take on it is with the whole cider making thing altogether, really, is it's a relationship with nature. There's a bit of to and fro, because Mother Nature provides the fruit, and then for me, my role is obviously doing the whole cider making process. It's getting all the juice in one place, which wouldn't really happen naturally, I guess. But then once it's all the juice is in one place, so you've done all the pressing, it's all in a barrel, is leaving it to Mother Nature to do the rest, really. So we're just coordinating things and providing an opportunity for a natural process, fermentation, to take place. And for me, I like to do everything pretty simply. All my methods are pretty simple. I don't like to add much, really. Okay, I do some medium ciders where some people might frown on it. I use sucralose, but this is why I prefer to do a dry cider, because you don't have to add anything at all, really. Let it ferment through to dryness. So, there's that relationship with nature. I guess essentially I'm a naturalist. Sorry, naturalist. A naturist is when you take all your clothes off and run around the orchard naked.
Yeah, that's maybe later after a few. Yeah.
I don't do that all the time. So yeah, basically it's for me, a dry cider is about as natural as you can get in the world of cider making. And that's a real authentic product, I think.
So I agree with what Robert has to say, particularly about the fact that it's kind of starts with nature's bounty, and one of the things that I find so interesting is how, for me, I can taste the difference between one vintage and the next in terms of the sugar levels, the ripeness, and I press on an annual basis, on a vintage basis, so I can really tell the difference between the vintages, and actually have to adjust my blend of apples to try and compensate. If there's too much too low acidity one year, I might have to add some high acid apples, and vice versa. But I actually then I'm actually quite a high intervention cider producer. So the fact that we go through that second fermentation, one, we add complexity to the process, and secondly, we're doing quite a lot with that fruit. So I'm not disagreeing with Robert, but I'm just saying just a different approach. In fact, two things I would say. First of all, on top of nature, I think I would add process, which we use the champagne method, and that's sort of a well-defined process. So that's what we do. I think there's also the personality, and maybe let's call it the personality of the cider producer that stamps an imprint on the finished product. So it's quite interesting. I came to it whilst on a study tour in Champagne. That was where I had my muse, my moment of inspiration, thinking I just loved what everybody was doing in Champagne. I just loved the study tour. But I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if we could apply the same ideas and the same methodologies, the same philosophies to beautiful, fresh English apples. So that was a starting point. It takes me about 3 years to produce a bottle of cider. So it's a really slow process. You make a huge investment you actually produce vintage 2 and 3 before you've even finished vintage 1. So then the other kind of the real moment of reckoning is when you present it to a customer, you know, at a food festival or a tasting event, and then you get the feedback, and then all that love, passion, ego, personality, idea, nature has all gone into the thing, and then you get a reaction, and you know, it's quite a big gulp moment. But I think those things all kind of all weigh in, and it's quite interesting. A lot of people react to my cider, say this is not what I expected at all. It's really super dry, but then again, happily most people like it. But there's also an element of expectation from customers. They're looking for something. You know, a lot of them are looking for something sweeter as an expectation.
Yeah, following that up, we started making dry cider only at a time when we were told that the American customer didn't want that. In the U.S., we have Angry Orchard, which is a very large company, and by large I mean they have a very large market share. And so when we would see data on cider, the data was really more about Angry Orchard and the Angry Orchard drinker, because that was our market. And so we developed a dry cider that research and market studies show that that's not what the customer wants, that the consumer wants sweet cider. And our response to that was that really more than just one thing, and your market research might say average consumer wants something sweet, but that's not recognizing all of the people that don't make up that majority opinion. And so to see what part of the market segment was not being able to enjoy cider because they weren't being exposed to what they want, whether they usually drink dry champagne or dry wines. I got into dry cider because I started to realize that my beer preference was for dry beer. I beer drinker, how much residual sweetness, and I started to realize over time that like really exceptionally dry saisons from Belgium really wowed my palate, and I wondered what we could do with cider to create these different flavors that, sure, maybe I'm not the average consumer. I'm happy to admit that. I like to make things for people that are looking for other flavors. And what's really most exciting about cider is that in the US is that there was this trend for cider beer. Have a draft house that has a lot of kegs, there would be, say, 23 devoted to beer and 1 devoted to cider, as if cider is a singular thing, as if someone who is asking for cider can be satisfied with the 1 picks. Absolutely. And I'm really happy now that in the US, you can find a wide range of cider styles. Sure, sweet ciders still sell very well. But dry cider is growing really quickly, and really the point is just that the apple can produce flavors for everyone, and we should explore all of them, I think.
Yeah, well said. Well said. Very interesting. John, were you going to add something?
Yeah, I think that's entirely true. I mean, cider fundamentally, as it comes, it ends up as a dry drink. I mean, this is what you get. You set out to make a minimum intervention product, which works on so many levels. Also, got to bear in mind the CO2, the environmental footprint of what we're doing, both from a chemical and transportation point of view. So the more you can cut out stages in that whole supply chain, the better, effectively. So what you're aiming to do is to add value at point of production, really. I mean, I think the value in, well, certainly if you're sourcing all your stuff direct from growers that you know, absolutely fine. But you can make the whole process smaller, effectively, and you're making less impact, but you're also making a better and more traditional product by doing it that way, effectively. So yeah, it's a huge bonus to what I've been calling environmental inactivity. So I'm an environmental inactivist, right? So you can achieve a great deal by doing fucking. You really can. that make a huge difference by the things that you don't do. And really, yeah, that just ties into making sure that you've got a handle on the whole thing from orchard to bottle, if that's where you're going. You really do need to have an eye on the whole process. Just don't put anything in that you wouldn't want to consume. So, hand sort, everything that we press is hand sorted. Because it's machine harvested, it has to be. And washed twice because it's machine harvested. It has to be.
You've gone very quiet again, John. Sorry, I couldn't hear that last sentence. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Okay. Sorry. I'm leaning back and not projecting. Right.
That's better.
Fine.
Thank you.
It really is a question of keeping a handle on the entire process from start to finish. If you want to make a good natural dry cider, if you're going to intervene chemically down the line, it doesn't matter what goes on, then that's fine. But if you're going to make a fine product, a fine bottle product, or a palatable, consistently drinkable draft product, then yeah, it really is just about attention to detail, to the whole process, and attention to tradition. Cider was always sent down the line and adulterated. It'd be put in barrels and sent from here down to Bristol, and we didn't know what happened to it then. It's all sweetened, watered down. What people were drinking in the past was no reflection on what the farms would have been producing 100, 150, and the rest years ago. That's all.
Right.
Market forces. People won't try.
Yeah. Well, it's fascinating actually listening to all of you, because I think I've tried ciders from all four of you. And you use different fruits, you use different methods. Some have more intervention than others, but all dry at the end. And it's fascinating to be able to taste that difference and how the fruit shines through in different ways. And I think you don't get that when you add sweetness to a cider, or you leave it in. There's difference there as well, but let's not go on to that. You cloud the kind of natural flavors of the fruit, don't you? And that fruitiness that can actually be perceived as sweetness sometimes is allowed to shine through when it's dry. And is that a theme? Is that a reason why you want to do dry cider? Is that something that, I mean, as a small cider maker myself, I started a couple of years ago. The reason I want to make dry cider is because I want to make some single varieties, and I want to show the difference between cider made from cider apples and cider made from eating apples, and let that fruit come through without meddling with it, which I think is what you're...
Most of the ciders that we make are single varietal, whether we use wine yeast or natural ferment. We 60,000 gallons of Newtown Pippin, which is an amazing American cider apple. Sorry, 60,000 liters. And we did that all natural ferment. So we fermented all 60,000 liters naturally in wood with nothing added. No yeast pitch, no adjuncts, no malic adjustments, literally completely natural ferment. And what we wind up finding is that we're able to express the apple better than any cider that we make using either wine yeast or if we back sweeten. And a lot of people are afraid to make dry ciders because apples, they taste like nothing. To that is that if you use quality apples, they taste like everything. They taste like that. And so my favorite trick to making dry cider is to create a cider that has no sugar in it, that has so much perceived sweetness on it. Can't believe you. Our cider cans, and because they by chemistry have no sugar in them, and Pippin or Albemarle Pippin natural ferment dry cider is just unctuously full of perceived sweetness that tastes exactly like the apple that we made the cider from. And that trick that you can play on a consumer by being a dry cider maker is, I think, one of the greatest achievements you can make as a producer of alcoholic beverages. And that's what brings me great joy. And making these single varietal ciders that are dry allows us to do this time and time again. And it's a lot of fun.
Really interesting. And I suppose, Peter, you were saying earlier about when people taste yours and, you know, the champagne method and they're surprised by it. What is it, do you think, that you said they were expecting something a bit sweeter, but if it was champagne, they wouldn't, would they, necessarily? What do you think it is? Is it because of that, the fruit that you're using, that they expect that, or is it something different?
I think a lot of people, not all, but a lot of people have in their kind of expectation a tannic and sweetened cider. So that is, you know, perhaps from a mainstream grower, that may be the only thing they've tried before. Perhaps lacking a little bit in character and individuality. So when they come across mine, it's really very different. It's quite delicate. It's relatively dry. There is a little bit of sweet residual sugar in mine, and I occasionally add a little bit of dosage at the very end just to balance the acidity in there. But it's definitely at the dry end for the vast majority, for many consumers, and it hasn't got any tannins in. I work with dessert fruits. So coxes and russets is a mainstay of my blend. And then I'll use different blends. I might use Bramley for a bit of acidity. Kanzi is a variety I came along, which is very nice perfumed, which gives a nice sort of perfume lift to the blend. And I think it is a blend, but I think you can taste the different elements through it. And those seem to come out at different times as the product evolves over time. So although, you know, we call it a process, or I call it a process, it's quite interesting that back to Robert's point, it is kind of a natural process that you kind of have to rely and let it do its own thing. So a cider that's been aged, you know, perhaps 12 months on lees will taste different from 3 years, will taste different from 5 years, and you can't really sort of manage that. You can sort of just take care of it and look after it, and then you just have to let it do its own thing. So you know, there is always that humbling moments where you go, okay, well, I've done everything I can. Let's just hope it's actually turned out as well as I hoped it would. Often it does. Mostly it does, but not always. So yeah, I think people have an expectation of a sweeter product, and so that surprises them. And I think the other thing that surprises is I have very little tannins. I press very gently. I don't look for tannins in my finished product. And there is a little bit there, but I try and avoid even getting the tannins that are there in the fruit that I use by pressing very gently. So it's just a different style, okay. A different expression of the gorgeous fruit we work with. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. And so, well, then let's, on the contrast, we'll come to Rob first and then John. But Rob, you work with both types of fruit when you're making your dry cider, don't you? So you've got cider varieties, bit sweet, bit sharp, but you also make some orchard medleys and things that have got more dessert and culinary varieties. What do you find is the difference between those when making a dry cider, and what's the reaction you get from your customers?
Well, if I relate this to the market perception that everybody wants a sweet cider, and that tends to be the commercial cider that you do get in your mainstream pubs, should we say. Actually, from my experience from doing my own little cider festivals in the past, and since I've set up the Mash and Press, is actually people do want a dry cider. It's just that there's just not many available, really. Same with, you know, you got the same argument with still versus sparkling. Most of the commercial ciders will be fizzy. I find that you know, all the ciders here near enough are still ciders, and people are happy with that. They want that, you know. I'm going off on a tangent here.
Right, no, well, just bring it back to the fruit a little bit. So the
fruit, yeah. So yeah, I started off collecting local fruits, and I find certainly with a blend of lots of different varieties. I don't necessarily know the names of all the varieties, but they're fairly old orchards. So they're mostly dessert and eating apples. A good blend will, you know, fully dry. It's a fantastic. It's probably more. There's low in tannins. which is, I guess, more of an Eastern Counties style, I guess, and an element of acidity. Now, I think when I first started, I was just throwing all the apples in, all the cookers and stuff like that, and it can make a cider that's too sharp. And I think people who don't sort of are fairly new to drinking cider, they might get confused over the difference between dry and sharp. They might try something that's really sharp and go, God, that's dry. And it's like, it's okay, it is dry, but it's not the dry that's making you do that, pull that face. It's the sharpness, you know. So I think so. You can get a bit too heavy on the sharps with that style of cider. It's only more recently that I've been able to experiment with cider fruit, and which is why I'm doing single varieties. It's for my own learning as much as anything else. And I can then, by doing the single varieties, I can understand the characteristics of that individual apple. I'm a big fan of sharp cider, but specifically the flavors you get with some of the sharp cider apples, as opposed to cooking apples, for example, it is the flavors. There's so much more character in the fruit sometimes. So I mean, is one better than the other in terms of a blend of non-cider apples compared to cider apples? I don't think so. I think it's just purely down to taste, and your taste buds are going to be different one day to the next day. You know, you can appreciate something one day a lot more when you had it 2 weeks ago and you thought, it's okay. You know, so there is an element of that as well. So yeah, it's one of them. I don't know what the conclusion to what I'm saying is really. I think it's just different strokes for different
Robert,
folks.
can I ask a question? Do you, when you get a blend of sharps, particularly dessert sharps, do you do anything to try and compensate for that sharpness? You know, you say that you get that reaction from customers, or do you find that just customers get used to it, or some really like it, or is there anything you do to kind of, you know, try and soften or ameliorate that sharpness?
Well, I think a lot of my ciders go through malolactic fermentation, so it's time as well in the process. Mm-hmm. So, like you said, some of your ciders you'll try them, you know, 1 year, another year down the line, and I think that's a big part of it. With time, malolactic fermentation will soften the acidity of it and round off that flavour. So yeah, I think so when I first started making cider, typically my first sale, the first place I'd sell the cider that I made the year before would be to Leicester Beer Festival, which was in March. Now that cider was way too young to be putting out there at that time, really, but you know, I wanted the sales. So if that same cider 6 months down the line and a year down the line is just so much better because it's had that time to mature and soften, and all the flavors, I guess, you know, they sort of meld together and become nice. So yeah, I think yeah, time definitely in that respect.
Well, let's bring John in here a bit, because John, you do blends as well as a lot of different single varieties. Some of those can be really tannic, some of those can be really sharp. How do you find working with those different types of fruits? Because I know you're with the single varieties, you're trying to deliberately showcase that fruit. But do you ever feel the need, or did you ever in the beginning feel the need to have to try and temper it at all, or have people reacted well?
Well, to be honest, when I first got seriously involved in cider making, which would have been 20 odd years ago, we made no single varieties at all. I mean, everything we did was made to the traditional British cider recipe, which would be like 70 or 80% bittersweet to sharps, whatever sharps you've got available. You could mark it an 80-20 as a single variety, because that's the way the house is effectively. But yeah, so a lot of it was we're working with mixed trailers from orchards which were planted with a blend in mind in the first place. So we could go around and harvest a dozen trees in the morning, press a barrel in the afternoon, and because they're all different varieties, we've got a balanced cider. So single variety came with pressure from the market. There's pressure from camera, to be honest, I think, in that they like to tick up. We've had a dab in it from here, we've had a dab in it from there, we've had a dab in it from over there, as it were. So, you know, that kind of pushed the single variety thing. But yeah, I mean, really, every apple has its place in a palette of flavours, if you will. It's like a colour palette, a dark end and a light end and a middle end. It's like blending perfume. You take the base notes and the mid notes and the top notes, you know, and you'll make something every year. Robert, you'll make something different with what you've got available. As you pointed out. And that's why we keep doing it. Because every year is its own year, it's different. There'll be something new, you know. The dry thing, well, cider kind of just ends up dry if you don't do anything to it. You can do beautiful things to it, like champenoise, which effectively is a British technique anyway, as it goes. Forest Dean, here we are. French have learned a lot from us over the years, like if they borrow our lawnmower, make sure they give it back on time, otherwise we'll get terribly upset and invade them. Anyway, sorry, I'm going off on a tangent.
That's all right. I guess the one thing I want to ask, because the time always flies by in these things, but you all make dry cider, you all make it successfully, you all market it successfully. What are the, you know, for anyone who's watching, there's a lot of cider makers who'll be watching who, as we've discussed, sometimes feel that the market demand is for sweet. How can they successfully change their own minds, but also that of their customers, to give dry cider a try and a real, you know, a chance?
It takes having the opportunity for them to try it, for one thing. So you need someone who knows a little bit about what they're talking about with cider behind the bar in a pub environment. So, you know, which is why it kind of works with what we're doing here, because, you know, being a place that's run by the brewer and the cider maker, you know, we can talk through the processes of, you know, and give people samples. You know, I've had so many people come through the door, go, oh, I don't like cider. Like, you know, I've had a bad experience when I was younger, blah, blah, the usual stuff. And I say, well, you've not tried mine yet. And then I'll give them little samples, and you see their face go, oh, wow, that's really nice, that. So, yeah, it's you start people on the sort of the mediums, and then you get them down onto the dries effectively. Typically here, I mean, at the moment, I've got more mediums than dries, but I've got a couple of great dry ciders. I'm drinking a Woodman's from Vale of Beaver at the minute, who's, if you've not ever seen his ciders around, they're really good. Recommend them. And the other dry one I've got at the moment is a 8.4% Dabadeck single variety, which is that can be a bit challenging for some people. So that's the one that I would really test how into cider you are. If you know, the really acidic or the really heavy tannin ciders, that's perhaps for the more experienced drinker, I guess. But you can have a lot of softer flavors with dry ciders, and so to get people into it, I think that's the way to do it. Provide the opportunity for them to try them. That makes sense.
Yeah. Thanks, Rob. Sam, were you going to come in?
Yeah, our answer to that question, how do you break tradition and get people to embrace something new? We decided to go, and I know that that's probably a whole different conversation, but my has been cans from day one, and I think to convince the consumer to make an effort, we felt like if we put our same package consumer was already familiar with, that we wouldn't be able to get their attention. And so we made these cans to look like something what it is and you want to know more about. It says dry cider on the front. I believe that our ability to get people to embrace dry cider as an everyday thing, as something they can keep in their fridge and not something that's for an occasion. Cider for occasions, but none of us want cider to be only for occasions like birthdays and graduations and whatnot. And so I think that embracing the the consumer is asking. To fight less battles when you really want to focus on getting people to change their desire for the liquid that they're drinking. So I know canning is something that's becoming more popular in the UK, but I'd encourage you all who make dry cider to consider it.
Thanks, Sam. Very interesting approach, yeah. And I'll bring Peter in here if I can, because yours is champagne method, you know, cork and cage, very different container to Sam's cans. How have you kind of carved your bit in the market for dry cider? And do you think that the bottle does it hamper at all, or do you find actually that we celebrate a lot in this country? I think so. That's all right. But you know, how's that for you?
I do think I think Sam's point is really interesting, because I think the larger formats, my cider is not cheap. I think it creates obstacles for people to try it and to experiment. So for me, I think sampling is really, really important, giving people a chance to taste it, and you know, that persuades people. And I think, you know, the more we all do that, the more we kind of encourage people to break outside their assumptions about what cider actually means. The other thing that I've found to be really helpful is that I've found that I've ended up with champions within my trade customers. So I might be working with a chain of 4 or 5 shops, retail shops, and one of them will always be the one that sells the most, because there's somebody in there, a member of staff, who is a fan, or who is, you know, really encouraging his or her customers to try. So actually finding those people who are going to be your champions is really, really helpful, and work with them. And it's really funny how it comes down to 1 or 2 individuals out of, you know, you'd think maybe the whole company will get it, but it seems to come down to, and I imagine it might be the same in a bar or in a festival. So getting those champions together is working for you or with you is important. But I think Sam's point is so good. I mean, I don't know how I'm going to do it, because the bottle is integral to our process, but I quite like the idea of taking that, you know, making it easier for customers to try new things. It's a good point.
Interesting. Thanks, Peter. John, how about you? You've been making dry for a long time in many different formats, so.
Goodness me, yeah, and everything ends up dry. And I'd just like to sort of echo Peter's champions point, which I think they're like, this is human nature. We have the micro influences, as it were, before the internet ever existed. That was my orthopedic consultant said to me last week, John, we weren't meant to live life online. So, as it were, yeah, dry cider, it really is. If you're going to experience the full flavour of the apple, I think you cannot keep back sweetening. It does you no favours at all. It's just no longer cider. Now, there are plenty of people who are like,
you've gone super quiet again. Sorry, John. I can't.
Mass market apple-based drinks. There are many people out there who will, you know, plump for mass market apple-based drinks based on perhaps the cost per ABV, but you know, none of us here are really in that market at all. We're purely doing it because, well, in my case, I like to drink it, as it were, and if I wasn't making it, I'd have to force somebody else to do it, which is sort of, you know, again, a reasonable approach.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
I find it's fascinating, and it's great to talk to all of you, because you all make very different dry ciders in different ways, in different formats, in different packaging, and you have different ways of marketing and everything, and yet you're all successfully selling dry cider, which is, you know, the great theme I think we're trying to get across with this discussion today. We haven't got a hard line cut off at 1:15, because it is almost 1:15 already. We haven't had any questions come in the chat yet, so I don't know how you guys are doing for time. If you have to go at 1:15, just say that's fine. I am being told to look at the Q&A tab, which I have now just found. Okay, so I'll go through these questions. We've had 4 questions come in, so I'll go through them, and if you want to answer, just chip in. So the first one is from Andrew Root. How important is it to develop buyer's palate in order to appreciate dry cider? Which I think we kind of touched on a bit there with Rob, with your explanation of what the importance of somebody behind the bar knowing what they're talking about, and then Peter about the champions. Is there anything you would add on that to help?
Well, everyone has their own palate anyway, so you can't force somebody to like something that they're not going to like. At the end of the day, some people just don't like cider, full stop. You'd have to give them 100 ciders before you found one that they did like, because they just don't like cider. That comes down to your taste buds, doesn't it?
Most people that we sell are familiar with beer, wine, or food, and so when I look at my dry cider portfolio, I ask myself, am I selling to someone who drinks beer? Am I selling to someone who drinks wine? Am I selling to someone who understands food? And whichever those answers are kind of dictates to me what I'll sell. If I'm selling into a beer account, I'll just take my most high acid thing and tell them it's like sour beer, and that's usually a pretty easy sell. And if I'm selling to a wine account, I'll take my Grand Cru that is a blend of 3 different vintages and naturally fermented, and I'll speak in wine terms. Either, but they like to eat good food. That's even more fun, So you just kind of use whatever tools you have at your side and go about slinging dry cider.
Absolutely right. 100%. Yeah, people come in the shop, they don't know what they're looking for. I say, okay, right, let's narrow it down. Red wine or white wine? And then we'll go Sharpie, or we'll go Tannin. Simple. And yeah, you're absolutely right. People do need a bit of steering sometimes. No, I think the market is creating itself to a certain extent. We sell so little medium cider compared to what we did 5 years ago. It's, now dry is the thing, but obviously it's, how should we say, spreading the branches of the market. So,
And how do you all feel about the term? It's a big question probably, but how do you all feel about the term dry, and whether those categories of dry, medium, sweet actually confuse things or are less helpful, or how do you feel about it as a phrase, as a class of drink?
It's a new thing. I mean, if you were buying a beer in Czech Republic, it would have the gravity printed on the label. And if you knew what you were buying, you'd know how sweet it was. So, I've kind of sideways tried to encourage camera over the last couple of years. Well, when you have your festivals, why don't you just put the SG of the cider that you're selling on the ticket when you sell it?
Yes, some makers do.
People will really quickly start to get the idea of where their comfort zone is.
I think it is a helpful description. It's like when somebody asks for a cup of tea, do you want how many sugars? None. Yeah, 1 sugar, no sugar. It is helpful because it's going to
up the spoon. Yeah.
But does that the tea can then sometimes be seen as one drink? Does that? I mean, Sam, I think you were talking about it earlier about cider being, one line in amongst all the beers in an establishment. Is that because people just see cider as cider, and if you just put medium, sweet, and dry, that still channels you down that funnel, doesn't it? If it's just one drink, but you can get it in 3 different levels of sweetness. I'm playing devil's advocate there, just.
I think it's a useful thing, but it should be a side note really, because
right.
You're so good at, James, you're so good at describing flavors. That should come. Sweetness should be, level of sweetness should become a part of a description. It might steer people towards going for this one or that one, but it's not the be all and end all. But far from it. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense, I think. Someone's saying, same guy again, Andrew Root. What is the difference between a beginner and an experienced dry cider maker? Because both of them would leave the juice to do its own thing, as we described at the beginning. You know, is it the most natural process that anyone can do at whatever stage in cider making they're doing?
Answer is just temperature. I mean, if you look at the difference between a beginner and a pro, whether you're using temperature control or not, you either have to master the region that you work in and understand the temperature that is natural, and that will take a lifetime, or you can cheat like I do and use temperature control, where I know the exact temperature of every ferment. And if I did control, my ciders would taste a lot more like ciders I made when I was quote unquote not a professional. For me, temperature control is the end all and be all between what is it differentiate my ciders between clean and not worth selling.
That's interesting.
I think what comes with time, I think it's that interaction between the cider maker and nature. So, you know, some years nature will serve you beautiful ripe fruit, and it's easy to work with. Other years it might come in a bit thin, you know, a bit lean, and you know, there might be less accumulation of flavors and sugars. So you might have to do some things to adjust it. You know, it might be in temperature. It's, you know, a second malolactic fermentation, or a bit of time in oak, or a bit of blending. So I think, and I think there's also the mastery of the basic process in terms of, you know, cleanliness, and so I think this has been my experience. It sounds like a really simple process, and I think if you're, with a bit of luck, with not very much knowledge, you can produce something good or experience. But with time, I think you learn more. You become more reliable at doing it and producing a more interesting, more complex, more satisfying product in the end for the customer. So I think you can get better at doing it with time and experience. But it doesn't stop somebody doing it well first time, even without a lot of knowledge.
I think that's a very fair comment, and has been my experience. I mean, I'm not anywhere near an experienced cider maker yet, but I'm definitely making better dry ciders now than I was at the beginning, because I understand the fruit a bit more. I understand the additional time I can use, or perhaps some different processes, or different storage, different batch sizes, all those things that I didn't get at the beginning. I could make dry cider and it was okay, but as you grow, there is still a lot more you can do, I think, and it's quite clear from this discussion, you can do to help create dry ciders that are different and evolve. It's not the case that whether you're a beginner or advanced, you're just putting stuff in a container and leaving it till dry and then bottling it. There's so much more to it, and you all use different methodologies and fruit and other factors to control that, which is fascinating.
Just James, on a couple of very small detail points as examples of that.
Yeah. In
my process, you can get corks which have a porosity. So obviously I cork my cider. You get different porosity of corks that will affect the speed at which the cider ages in the bottle. You can get a different porosity on the crown caps, which changes the amount of oxygen flow that goes through when it's bottle aging. So, you know, those things make a difference as well. I mean, it's, you know, really small little details, but as you learn more and read and talk to people and experiment, then you can start to add, I think, complexity, nuance, or sometimes just help the fruit actually express its own, you know, core, you know, what it's really about, and stop other things influencing it more than you really wanted to.
Yeah, that's fascinating, isn't it? I mean, I didn't know anything. I didn't know you could get different porosities of cork. That's a little learning thing for me there. But it's fascinating how even just little changes from year to year, and we only get 1 year at it, don't we? One try a year, one try at a time, in the main. So, you know, even those that have been doing it for 10 years have only had 10 goes. So I think if anyone is watching and they're new to cider making, you shouldn't be put off, because it feels like there's a lot to learn. You can try these things, you know, as you go, one at a time, and you'll find your way, won't you? So other questions, right? I'm not sure. Is dry cider the only real cider? So Andrew's put at the bottom. I'll let you all answer that if you wish. I think it's a bit tongue-in-cheek. But someone's also added, one of the big confusions is when it comes to tannic and acid and lack of sugar. So I guess it depends on the fruit you're working with. And you mentioned this earlier, Sam, I think in the chat, and Rob mentioned it too, around acidity and that confusion. So what are the other ways that we haven't talked about already that you might have kind of got around that to help your customers understand the difference? I suppose particularly for those that are working with the two different types of fruit.
Well, it's just
I struggle greatly when people have a difficulty telling the difference between acid and sugar, because that's on cider. So when someone is drinking something high acid and telling me that it's sweet, it definitely requires you to take a big step back and try to approach the conversation, because there's a, perhaps fundamental difference in language that's causing you not to be able to communicate. So when I hear that, I like to take back, and I like, it's honestly a very difficult conversation. But going to the greater question of, it's a different perspective for me here, because sweet cider is non-alcoholic cider in the States, juice, right? And medium is a term in all, whereas obviously over there, dry, medium, and sweet are the norms. So it's something that's not understood here at all. And familiar with wine, you talk about dry things, but the word is a kind of bizarre word. It's not like these ciders are not for like saying something so obvious, but I'm trying to teach my daughter what the term dry means, and she's asking me like very good questions about water, and so we use all these terms that have such a long history, and they're like organizational, like you all are part of a cider making tradition that's thousands of years old, and you use words that have been handed down to you, but trying to get the modern appreciate them on the face value that you take them for is a really, really big challenge. So we just decided to be dry and kind of walk away from the conversation. And because I recognize, like, what is a dry cider? I know that I'm dry because I have no sugar, but I don't believe cider is only sugarless cider. And I'm thankful that I don't have to be a part of the conversation of what that level is, and leave that to you all with the longer term.
Very good points.
I'll just describe it as a scale. So, the dryness is at one end of the scale and sweet is at the other. And obviously, if you've got something that's really dry, but it's also really tannic as well, everything's at that end of the scale. So, yeah, you just have to do, I describe tannins as that kind of like that effect that coats your teeth, and I say related to like say red wine, or say if you've got a strong black tea, that's that kind of that coats your mouth. That's the tannins, and you get that with tannin-rich ciders. But so you just have to differentiate the different scales of those components that make a cider. Is in
separate them out a bit.
Yeah, the sweetness scale, dry sweet, the tannin scale, and the acidity scale, and then beyond all that, you've got the flavors, which you're good at describing, and I can't. I'm getting leather from a 17th century boot. And,
I haven't used that one yet.
Yes.
Say that again, John. Sorry, I didn't hear you.
Oh,
sorry.
Zinc and burning rubber.
Oh, right, yeah.
And licking a shed next to a bonfire.
I think sometimes the descriptions, it's hard, isn't it? But it is helpful, and everybody gets different things, because like you said, Rob, earlier, everyone's palate's different, but helping them to tune into those flavors helps them to kind of appreciate the broader spectrum of the drink, doesn't it? And then want to try more. Somebody's asked a very interesting question about your individual definitions of dry. Interested in whether they're all the same. Is it no sugar at all, or is it no perceptible sugar, or do you have a different definition in your mind? I know, Peter, you said earlier you sometimes add a little bit of a dosage.
I take as my guide what the Champenois do. So right. Sort of 15 grams per liter would be the maximum for a dry in my description.
Okay.
And I would typically it's less than that. I'm typically sort of 6 to 10 grams per liter of actual sugar, residual sugar in the finished product. I personally look for balance. but many people, I think, again, it comes from it starts where you come from, what your expectation is. But many people would call it a dry cider, the dry end of the range of ciders.
Yeah.
But that's the level. I'm typically about 6 to 10 grams per litre.
Okay, I suppose that's probably slightly higher than some of the other makers here who are trying to fermenting to 0 for some of your products.
Yeah.
It ends up 997, 996 SG. Yeah.
Okay.
Then you get the perceived sweetness from the tannin illusion from your bittersweet apples, which is why they're called bittersweet apples. When they're fermented out to dry, you get an illusion of the effect that it has in your mouth. It's not sweet, but it fills the same notch in your brain. If you see what I mean. Yeah. So yeah, if they're pressed at the right time and allowed to ferment naturally, you keep an eye on them and bottle them if you wish, or drink them when you think they're ready to drink. Then you'll get a dry cider, which is, it doesn't have to have dry or sweet or medium. It just has to have just cider. It just says cider. Or traditional cider. But, yeah, any level of processing is fine because everybody likes something different. And one of the reasons we pursued making so many different single varieties is because there really is something out there for everyone. So, like a dry foxglove, I just had one which was 50% foxglove. Frightening. Okay? That's what I do.
Yeah.
Some people love this. Yeah, some people will love a single variety Ashton bitter, the other end of the scale.
Yeah.
There's
so much more to it, isn't there? Yeah.
There is, yeah. It's just such a panoply of flavours, all of which deserve attention and deserve to be treated in the way that expresses their potential the most.
Yeah.
Effectively.
I agree. Somebody's also added, Alice has added, what's the highest SG that you would count as dry cider? And I think that's maybe a little bit difficult, actually, isn't it? Because Peter, like you were saying earlier, with you're following the champagne rules, they have specific limits where you can count as brut or etc. My mind's just escaped me for the other categories. But John, you were saying, well, it's got to be below 0.999. So I think,
for a commercial dry cider, I would just go for what we call competition limits and say, right, this is below 1,005. That's if I was putting a cider into a competition tomorrow, and normally they would specify gravity of below 1,000, 1,005 or below.
Right. So it depends on the circumstance, what you're creating, the perception. Yeah.
It's called dry. It isn't dry, but if you're a merchant, as it were, generally the average consumer would not perceive, hopefully, the cider is blended correctly. They wouldn't perceive the back sweetening because the back sweetening would be applied according to the blend. So we would add sugar according to counteract the amount of acidity in the dry blend. So for a single variety foxglove, for instance, I've sweetened one to 1,025 and nobody noticed.
Yeah. Well, yeah, when you consider the comparison too, if you think about some of the more mainstream sweeter and maybe fruit ciders, some of those are clocking, what did I see, 30 to 40 grams in a 500 ml bottle of sugar.
Okay, wow.
So when they've got that kind of sweetness to compare to, probably a lot of things taste dry. But I think you were going to come in earlier with a comment, Sam, and you missed out.
Yeah, sorry. Doing actual sales.
Okay.
I'm talking around a little bit, but the point is we made our first air cider with 8 grams per liter. We is 3 grams compared to is for our consumer. Typical description.
Okay. That's interesting. So I think in answer to the questions in the board, you know, there's everyone has a slightly different view, but I think in whichever way you look, whether you're, you know, whatever rules you think are best suited for your cider, that you know, dry has got some flexibility. Robert Muir is asking whether a better definition would be to use descriptors such as like sweetness, tannin, and acidity, and then scale those to kind of give people a little bit more of a wider context. What do you think about that as dry cider makers? Do you think that would help?
Probably not. I think you know, that might just confuse the issue if you have. I've seen colour wheels on the back of alcohol packaging, which, to be honest, I've just found to be perhaps a confusing marketing hint,
Right.
rather than anything really constructive. I think we just need to try to continue to educate our consumers. The only way you're really going to appreciate the apple varieties that are involved is if you're going to try the dry ciders, you know, and the variety of dry ciders, and get to know what you like. And if you're really interested in cider, then that's just going to carry on, you know, it will just build your interest. And we've seen this with our broader customer base, our specialised customer base. The more they learn, the more they're interested in learning.
Yeah.
The more intrigued they become, and the more they're waiting, you know, for our next varietal or seasonal release, you know, or our next vintage. And I think it's, you know, it really is a growth market from that point of view. I mean, I've been trying to promote this idea for over 10 years now. You know, yeah, you can have a bottle on the top shelf, which has got a £30 price ticket on it. That just puts everything in perspective from a marketing point of view. You see what I mean? And those will be dry ciders. There will be no chemical intervention, because it doesn't keep as a shelf life.
What do you think about, you know, educating the consumer is really important, like you say, and the more they know, the more they want to learn. How do you get that when you don't have the person behind the bar or the champion to rely on, and you're putting your bottles out there? Tom's mentioned in the chat about German wine classification requiring residual sugar and acid content to be measured and listed on the label. So is there something needed for that in cider? Is there more education needed on the label to explain this is dry or not, or why, and this is the varieties in it, and this is what they bring?
Definitely, I think there is, yeah. I mean, if you're going to justify the shelf price of top quality ciders and pellets, I think really, to be honest, to gain consumer confidence, we are going to have to start stating those levels on the label, just so that the consumer can be confident as to what they're getting, because we need to try and, how should we say, step ahead of the fancy 750ml culture, which we've seen quite a few examples of over the last couple of years, where people will just stick any old thing in a 750ml bottle, call it dry cider, and punt it out retail for 10 or whatever. And what they're doing effectively is shooting the entire market in the foot, because we've come across some dubious products which have been, you know, in that category. So yeah, any degree of accreditation is good.
Okay.
I think the idea of creating some classification is quite helpful in some contexts. I think it can be helpful if a buyer is trying to buy something off the shelf at a supermarket, and they can say, well, I've had a dry cider before, I've had this brand, here's another dry cider, and it gives you that confidence to take a leap from the one I've tried before, which I liked, to this other one, which I haven't tried before, which, so in that context, I think that classifications can be helpful. The context where you're able to, like Robert, actually share with somebody, here's a range of ciders, try this one, this is a dry, this one's a bit sweeter, this one's a bit more tannic, then I think those classifications probably just get in the way. But in a mass market, in a supermarket setting, where there's nobody to talk to you about the product that's there, and customers have to just look at the label and make they've got a 3-second or 5-second window to make that decision. I think some classification might actually be quite helpful.
Okay, what do you think, Sam? Because you were saying earlier about your cans and making them stand out, and dry cider being a factor in that kind of piquing people's interest. You make the most out of anyone here, and you're probably in the supermarkets more so than the other makers here. How do you think, or how do you feel? We were talking about kind of transparency, a bit more on ingredients, on the labels, to help people understand kind of what they're buying and why it's different. What are your thoughts on that? You're kind of speaking really, really fast, and your mouth's not keeping up.
My internet connection is that very front of our can over again. Well, no, and you dig in. Which and dry, or is this cider different than the other one? It's all kind of hypothesis of thing.
Okay, so by having that consistency across your products, forcing them to turn it around and see what the difference is, I think is what I got from you there, which is interesting. That's kind of what you do, Rob, isn't it? You've got dry written on front of yours, and then you need to turn it around to see the kind of varieties.
My bottles.
Yeah.
My labels on the 2019 season were a bit of a rush job because I had to tag on to somebody else's label order to get their card, because labels are expensive.
Yeah.
And the more you get, the cheaper they are, type thing. So I tagged on to my mate's thing. So it was a bit of a rush job, really. So the year before, I tried all the site, tried them so I could write descriptions, and I went round some of my customers, got a little bit of help of descriptive words to put on the labels. This time round, and you'll see it if anyone's got this bottle, it literally just says what the varieties are, and there's no real description of flavours in it. It does say dry on the front. It is a dry cider, but it has been primed with a small amount of sugar, so it's on the dry side, but it's not fully dry until it conditions, which will take time. So I suppose that's one little extra bit of the relationship with nature, is I've fiddled with it in the end by adding sugar. But I think, sometimes by having that conditioning in it, the bubbles can sort of lift the aroma, and it just gives it that something different. But as I said before, most of my packaging has been in bag-in-box, so obviously you can't do a sparkling cider in bag-in-box. So by moving into a bit of bottling, I have a new opportunity to try this. So it's exciting for me. So when I first, when you open a bottle, it's like, is it gonna be bubbly? Oh, it's not bubbly. And then when you first get your bubbles, you're like, ooh, bubbles. And it's just really exciting, and it's just a new product after making still ciders for so long. But there's in terms of a dry cider, it's still dry ciders, fantastic. Sparkling dry ciders, fantastic. So yeah. So yeah, they say dry on the label.
Yeah.
It's a short answer.
No, thanks, Rob. I'm very conscious of time, and also very conscious that I'm losing light here, and I can't reach the light switch. So apologies that I'm slowly disappearing.
What time is it in Lincolnshire?
Yeah, it's 4:45 already.
1954.
Yeah, it's been fascinating discussion. I just thought, well, if we just kind of wrapped it up a little bit now, are there any other points any of you would like to kind of finish with around, you know, anything we've discussed this afternoon? Should I go around the room, or do you just want to? We'll just do a free for all.
Well, I think just keep making dry cider, to be honest, because you know, if you want cider, there is only dry cider. It turns out when you make it. So I think you probably ought to come to terms with it. There are going to be people that don't like it. They're not our market, right? They're just not.
No, well, yeah.
They're not our customers. It's that simple. And people can take cider as middlemen down the line, do what they like with it. You know, back sweeten, kumquat and fuckwit, whatever they want to put in there, they can have it. It's absolutely no problem with that at all. But yeah, I think we just need to just keep flying the flag, really.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair comment, isn't there? There's consumers out there that want dry cider, and you all attest to that. So if you want to make dry cider, there's a market there. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to slightly disagree with John here, though. I'm going to say that dry cider is great, but I love the diversity in cider. So for me, that's brilliant. So I love cleaved cider. I love ice ciders can be fantastic as well. So I wouldn't limit my experimentation with cider, either as a consumer or as a producer, particularly as a consumer, just to that one type, personally.
Peter, I agree entirely. As I said, there should be cider for every consumer.
Yeah.
And ice ciders, sweet ciders, 100%.
Okay, we're agreed.
Yeah, I think so. There's a market for all of it, and that's what's beautiful about it all, isn't it? That variety, and you shouldn't necessarily limit yourself to one method. Experiment with all. Go, Sam. You were going to say something.
Yeah, want to say that I'm honored. And drinking cider is what about making important thing. Part of the bigger thing, which is thank you for having me.
No, thanks for joining us, Sam. That was brilliant. Thank you. Rob, do you want to add a last comment from your perspective?
Just say it's great to take part in this this conversation with everybody. You know, nice to see everyone. It's and just generally the event's really cool thing. And in terms of dry cider, yeah, just I think there's definitely a market for it, and just the variety, just by having loads of ciders there for the customer. You know, once they've run out of mediums to try, they've got no choice to move to the dry.
That sounds like a camera festival, man. You know, there's nothing left on Sunday night except the dries. Ooh.
Well, you might still convert a few people doing it that way, but you know, yeah. If you make it, they will try it. If you build it, they will come, type thing. You know.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think if it's out there, it has to be out there for people to try it. So I think it's obviously really good. So I'm drinking it.
Yeah. Well, thank you all for joining me this afternoon. It's been fascinating to listen to. I've drunk ciders from all of you, and as a new maker, I find all the variants and everything you're doing very inspiring. So keep doing what you're doing, and I hope our paths cross again in the future. Cheers to you all.
Thank you, James.
Oh, cheers, everyone. Excellent.
Bye.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
Ciao for now.
Ciao for now.